celebration honoring Dr. Fauci and so many others who have given their lives to this field. We're honored to have held World AIDS Day receptions for the past several years, and equally honored to be in the presence of so many leaders. Here I'm going beyond the first rows, so many leaders in the fight against HIV/AIDS for so many years. You've been key figures. This year's World AIDS Day theme is putting ourselves to the test, achieving equity to end HIV, and this room is representative of those goals. We're excited to hear from esteemed speakers today. Secretary Antony Blinken of State, D Puffy from Lesotho, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, of course, Dr. Fauci, who is, well, truly a committed public servant for so many years and has done so much across a range of issues, and we're so grateful to you, sir, for your service. And Ambassador John Nkesagong, who is here, who is the head of PEPFAR. They'll be having a fireside chat later in the session, moderated by Sandy Thurman. This global community is well aware of the power of partnerships, as seen recently in the Global Fund's 7th replenishment this September. Thank you to the Global Fund and its partners for a successful replenishment effort. This takes us to our co-host for today, PEPFAR, well known to all of you. PEPFAR is perhaps one of the best examples of strong public-private collaboration, and I might add, a bipartisan public-private collaboration. Through its 19 years, it has saved more than 25 million lives and prevented millions of HIV infections. As we will hear this morning, PEPFAR, in coordination with the Global Fund, UNAIDS, the global NGO community, universities, the private sector, and more, that's all of you out in the room, have supported country partners in achieving incredible strides against AIDS and achieving for epidemic control by 2030. Today, we would like to celebrate these tremendous achievements made by countries globally and partners alike. Even amidst a global pandemic, this strong community has been able to recommit and re-strengthen its presence and impact. We're excited to have an esteemed group of individuals with us here today and watching on live streaming. All these people have made their mark on the AIDS response and will continue to do so as we go into next year and approach PEPFAR's 20th anniversary. You're all invited to that party too. Congratulations to you all. Thank you for being here. We're also grateful to our corporate partners, Abbott, Gilead, and Merck. Thank you for your leadership in this space and your contributions to BCIU in support of this event. It's now my pleasure to introduce the first speaker this morning, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and I'll invite you to begin coming to the stage. It is said that the fight, someone once said, probably a dead white male, once said that success has many fathers. Well, I can tell you that PEPFAR in the fight for HIV/AIDS research has many mothers, and this is one of the key mothers standing right here next to me. She's represented the East Bay of San Francisco Bay since 1999, one of the earliest communities devastated by the AIDS epidemic. And since her first days in Congress, she's been a leader, starting with the Clinton administration through the Bush administration and moving through today. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, in your 24 years in the Congress, you've achieved so many remarkable things. This is only one of them. We're honored to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Nelson, for that very gracious introduction and for your leadership and for bringing us all together on this very important time as we remember those who we lost due to this horrific, deadly deadly pandemic. So thank you all. Thank you for your support. And I see so many out here who have been the wind beneath our wings. So many activists, so many great warriors, so many business community leaders. We couldn't have done this without you. And let me just first acknowledge the leadership of Dr. John Nkengason. Thank you so much for serving as a great global AIDS coordinator. Thank you. And of course, Dr. Fauci, let me just take a moment to honor you and thank you. Because when I first came to Congress, I believe Dr. Fauci was the first person that I met and talked to about HIV and AIDS. And he had been in this fight, this struggle forever, oftentimes by himself and alone. And look at what you have done in terms of saving lives and setting the framework for COVID relief and dealing with so many infectious diseases, including how we now approach COVID as a result of what we did during PEPFAR, thanks to you. So thank you and congratulations, and I look forward to this next chapter of your life. But you've got to come to Capitol Hill before you leave, because we have some educating to do, a little bit more. So thank you, Dr. Fauci. And to our Secretary Blinken. Oh boy, what a difference an administration makes. Gosh. And I have the privilege to chair the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee, and I've had a chance to witness and be with our Secretary on the world stage. And between Secretary Blinken and Speaker Pelosi, we got the whole world in our hands. The rest of the world knows that we're back, leading with respect, dignity, and with our values. And I thank you. I'm really proud of the work that you are doing in this administration, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. And where is D, our ambassador? Thank you for your voice. You're making it real for everyone. Thank you for coming to Capitol Hill. Thank you for making sure that we don't forget the impact of the pandemic, but what we're doing now to get to an AIDS-free generation by 2030. That's still our goal. Even though we had a few setbacks during COVID, we're moving ahead, forging ahead, thanks to you. Also, let me just talk a little bit about the tremendous achievements that we've made during the past 2 decades since PEPFAR's establishment. And I won't be very long, but I wanted to salute Sandy Thurman, because there is no way we would be here today if it weren't for Sandy Thurman. And I remember, was it 1999? We took a presidential mission, myself, Sandy, Congresswoman Carolyn Kilpatrick, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Jesse Helms' staff, and a few others, to the continent of Africa. And we went to villages and we went to clinics and we saw the devastating death of women, children, men, families, just horrific. And many of you know what was taking place and saw that. And after our presidential mission, we came back and we got to work on PEPFAR, in essence, what has morphed into PEPFAR. So Sandy, that trip, that visit, in coming to Congress, that forced me to say, there's no way, I have no option but to deal with HIV and AIDS, the global pandemic, both here in America and abroad. And so thank you for that visit, that very first trip. And you know, sometimes one visit to the continent or wherever you travel to can open your eyes and make you even more fervent about finding solutions to problems. So Sandy, thank you so much. And you know, we did all this when we had a Republican president and when Democrats were in the minority in both chambers, with 205 Democrats and 230 Republicans in the House. That's how we got PEPFAR passed. So I just want you to remember that in this context today. It's undeniable that strong bipartisan U.S. leadership across administrations and from the Congress has helped advance our goals both on the domestic front and on our global HIV pandemic. We know that ending HIV requires all of us that we stand together in a bipartisan effort and fully commit to deliver the funding, education, and resources to people living with HIV and those most at risk. Globally, AIDS-related deaths have been cut by almost 2/3, and new HIV infections have been reduced by more than a half since their respective peaks. In community after community where AIDS once brought unfathomable death and despair, there is now hope. And so I just want to thank our secretary because through nearly $100 billion investment in PEPFAR, and as the largest donor, mind you, of the global fund, to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, which we started on Capitol Hill at the Banking Committee with Congressman Chair then Jim Leach and myself, the Global Fund, we set the framework for that. It's helped transform the global health landscape. And through the leadership of President Biden and Secretary Blinken, the United States has led a replenishment round for the Global Fund this year that has so far yielded an additional $15.7 billion to continue that fight. And this is major. This is huge. So again, I want to thank this administration. Finally, I just want to say, and the Secretary knows I'm going to share this because I think you all know and maybe don't know some of the history, but when PEPFAR, when we first wrote, and I wrote first bill for PEPFAR, it was the Congressional Black Caucus that led on this effort. Don't ever forget that because so many are recreating this history and leaving us out. It's like, and I have to share that because our young people know that black people work together to help save lives on the continent of Africa. And so many events I go to, so many forums, so many videos, we don't even exist as black people, as members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And on this issue, I want you to remember that it was the Black Caucus that led on PEPFAR and on the Global Fund. And so I had to share that with you because this is quite a moment for the Congressional Black Caucus. Then we only had maybe 10 or 12 members. Now we have 58 unbelievable members of the CBC. And the CBC is going to continue to lead until we see an AIDS-free generation, hopefully before 2030. Thank you again, and may God bless.
You can always be sure that Congresswoman Lee will bring the energy, even early in the morning. Thank you. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce D Puffy. D is a native of Lesotho in Southern Africa. I had the chance to get to know her before the session this morning. She is a beneficiary of PEPFAR. She has made a name for herself in counseling on HIV/AIDS issue, as an advocate on HIV/AIDS issues. She's a youth ambassador for the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Fund, and she's working toward a career in public health. And we were glad to be able to be with Dr. Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health at HHS, and talk about the work of public health before the session this morning. Dee, we're so delighted to have you here this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm truly humbled to be here today on behalf of Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of PEPFAR, the program that saves lives of millions of children, youth, families around the world, including my own, like Nelson just said. 7 years ago, PEPFAR and the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric Foundation and the fight against the fight for an AIDS-free generation were the furthest thing on my mind. After I tested positive for HIV when I was 17, close to 18, I was really surprised by the lack of support I got from the facility. I remember clearly what the doctor said when I was there to get staged, because after you test, you go to the doctor to stage which WHO stage you're at. And she was like, you see, you girls, you don't get to use condoms and you'll definitely die of AIDS. So it was really painful for me because really in my country, Lesotho, HIV is still a leading cause of death. So after I tested positive, I felt so ashamed and alone, believing that my dreams of having my family won't be there. at all. But while the negative feelings I felt about my HIV status in that moment nearly defeated me, I was connected to PEPFAR-funded experts at ECPAF who made sure that I was enrolled into treatment and connected with other young women like myself who were navigating the world as someone living with HIV. The support I experienced lifted me out of my depression. I was really depressed that I even attempted suicide. I was encouraged to know that many of the HIV-positive women I met there were able to stay in good health and have the babies of their own who are HIV-free. Over time, because of the medical and psychosocial support I received, I was able to achieve a viral suppression, so now I'm low and undetectable. And finally, my dreams of motherhood came true because I have a HIV-negative daughter who is 2 years old. So I know my story is not the unique one because PEPFAR, over 5.5 million cases of new pediatric AIDS infections have been averted, and more than 20 million people have received life-changing care since the program is founded 20 years ago. So now that my dreams of motherhood have been realized, I work to give back to the young women in Lesotho who are impacted by HIV and AIDS. And as a senior youth ambassador for ECPAF, I help empower the adults and girls like I was accessing the HIV services and develop life skills to stay healthy and strong. In each interaction with these girls and young women, I emphasize that it is important of knowing one's HIV status and take strides to remove the shame and stigma associated with HIV. And for those who tested HIV positive, I provide the psychosocial support by connecting them to the peer support groups, which I was part of them, and really helped. And we establish strong bonds and true friendships, and we eliminate the feelings of stigma and shame, because most of the time, our young people, stigma that we get, most of it is perceived, is the self-stigma that we have. We think that everyone still says that we are HIV positive. So I share my story to say that having HIV does not define me, nor does it end my dreams for prosperous future. Both my daughter and I, that achieving an end to a pediatric AIDS is possible if we prioritize financial and political investment in programs like PEPFAR. As I close, I want to acknowledge the tireless leadership of Secretary Blinken, Dr. Nkengasong, and Dr. Fauci as the global health community continues to strike and end AIDS and HIV in more than 50 other countries around the world. Thank you so much for inviting me today, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I have a daughter who is roughly Dee's age, and thank goodness for this generation, because you're going to take this torch and so many other torches and carry them forward. Thank you. We've started the work. You'll finish it. Thank you for coming, Dee, this morning. This next introduction is for me a personal pleasure as well as a professional one, because I've had the privilege of knowing Tony Blinken for over 25 years, since we were both young aides just across the park here in the old what was then the old executive office building, working for President Clinton. I remember sitting on a Saturday afternoon. I was working on Latin American trade policy. Tony was a speechwriter, and I remember trying to teach him quickly about the president's policies on Latin America so that he could turn them into golden words for the president's trip to South America, and boy, he did. And that started a friendship that's lasted for many, many years. Since those days, long ago, in the old executive office building, Secretary Blinken has gone on to hold so many positions as he advanced at the National Security Council, at the State Department, in the White House itself. He was Deputy Secretary under Secretary John Kerry. In 2002, he began working for then Chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Joseph Biden, and has been, I think it's fair to say, over the last 20 years, perhaps President Biden's closest aide, certainly on foreign policy issues. The intellectual chemistry and connection between them is incredible. I've seen it. I don't think since James Baker have we had a Secretary of State who could speak so forcefully in the President's voice, knowing what the President is thinking and speaking for the President. So having Tony Blinken in this position is so powerful because he doesn't just speak as the Secretary. He speaks as the President's alter ego in many ways on these issues. I'll end with this. I took a look at his schedule over the last 10 days. He was in Qatar attending a very important summit. There was also some soccer played on the sidelines, but he had a set of bilateral meetings that were, of course, crushing. He flew back for Thanksgiving, as a good father should, and then immediately went to Romania, where he was earlier this week with the NATO foreign ministers talking about the Ukrainian war. Incredibly important meeting. He flew back here in time to greet Emmanuel Macron, to host a lunch at the State Department yesterday with Vice President Harris, to attend, of course, the President's state dinner for President Macron. And I was so pleased to see that he was able to take his mother, who raised him in Paris, Judith Pizar, to the state dinner. Really, what a way to honor your parents and the generation that came before. But it's a sign of his priorities that despite that incredible 10 days, and I won't even go past 10 days, of travel and effort and engagement, he is ending his week with us here, celebrating PEPFAR, celebrating World AIDS Day, and focusing all of us with the megaphone that only he can bring on the issue of HIV/AIDS research and progress against this deadly pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, the 71st Secretary of State, Tony Blinken.
Thank you. Thank you. Please. Good morning, everyone. To my friend, long-standing friend, Nelson Cunningham, thank you for those wonderful words, but thank you even more for your leadership, for BCIU's leadership. It is making a profound difference, and we are grateful for it. And to everyone here this morning, I see a remarkable community in this room. And community is the word, because so many people from so many different areas have come together in this fight, and it's because of that. It's because of that community, an enduring, powerful community, that so much extraordinary progress has been made. Dee, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. In and of itself, that takes remarkable courage. And in sharing it, you are inspiring so many other people. You are showing a way forward, and that's going to make a difference in countless lives. It already has. That you're here with us, and that you have a healthy baby daughter. That is, it tells us, it reminds us that an AIDS-free generation really is within our grasp, and how much that our world has to gain by actually achieving it. Your story is continuing. A new story is starting. Couldn't be better than that. Dr. Fauci, Dr. John, Mother Barbara. You know, we throw words around and we say it's an honor to be with someone. It genuinely is an honor to be with the three of you. Those of us who are in government service in one way or another, we get to do a lot of things in our jobs. But to each, in your own ways, to have been the most extraordinary leaders in quite literally saving lives over so many years, I don't think it gets any better than that. You have made, continue to make, the most profound difference in the lives of so many people around the world. It is genuinely an honor to be with you today. And let me just say one last thing. I think the first rule of politics is never follow Barbara Lee onto a podium. But you have to do it sometimes. So, we are marking a celebration, but also a solemn occasion this World's AIDS Day. We're celebrating a lot, but we have to start by acknowledging that 40 million lives were lost since the beginning of this epidemic in 1981. Those of you in this room who have been working on this for decades now, doctors, researchers, lawmakers, implementers of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, you've lost patients, you've lost colleagues, you've lost friends, you've lost loved ones. You know, you understand better than anyone the human toll that lies behind the numbers that we talk about and throw around all the time. The world was a different place before PEPFAR's launch in 2003. At that time, a large gap had emerged between wealthy and poor nations over access to antiretrovirals. In some parts of the world, when HIV-positive patients were first given their diagnosis, they were also told to prepare for the end. Coffin makers in many of these places were making record profits. When President George W. Bush launched PEPFAR, it changed the course of public health history, and I would say history in general. Much of the program's success has been made possible by the leadership of, as I said, so many of you in this room, and of course, many more outside it. Dr. Fauci, as is well known, had already been working on HIV/AIDS for decades when, in the spring of 2002, President Bush asked him to travel to Africa to see if a program like PEPFAR could actually work on the ground. It was on this trip that Dr. Fauci first met a CDC lab director in Cote d'Ivoire, who happens to be with us today, Dr. Kegasong, who helped show him that such a program was in fact feasible. So we are incredibly fortunate that Dr. John has continued his illustrious career in public health, including most recently as the first director of the Africa CDC. We're luckier still that he is now leading PEPFAR's future as our U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator. John, thank you. So as history will record, on his return to Washington, Dr. Fauci presented his findings to President Bush, and he had in mind a strong program, $500 million. At the end of the meeting, President Bush pulled Dr. Fauci aside and asked him to raise the program's ambitions even higher and build what he called a game changer for the developing world. Months later, in the 2003 State of the Union address, President Bush announced the United States government would invest $15 billion in the global fight against HIV/AIDS over 5 years, noting, and I quote, that seldom has history offered a greater opportunity to do so much for so many. Dr. Fauci, again, the world, the country knows you now so well for everything that you've done to lead us through this epidemic of COVID, but it's so vital that people also know you for all that you've done for PEPFAR from its very outset and for a lifetime of service that you've devoted to our country and to the world. Thank you. Now, there's another very important piece of history that needs to be recorded. You've heard reference to it earlier. President Bush was able to launch such an ambitious program in no small part thanks to the tireless efforts of Congresswoman Lee and the Congressional Black Caucus. There is a letter sent to President Bush by CBC in 2002 that should be in the Smithsonian, because that document was absolutely critical in focusing the President's attention and urging him to take action. It called on the President to launch a major new U.S. initiative to fight AIDS. This leadership, that letter, Mother Barbara, that leadership was integral to PEPFAR's start, as well as its subsequent congressional reauthorizations in 2008, in 2013, in 2018. And Barbara continues to be, and I use the word advisedly, one of the fiercest advocates to this day. PEPFAR has benefited from bipartisan support, as we've heard, across 4 presidencies, across 10 Congresses. It's resulted in an investment of more than $100 billion to the global HIV AIDS response. This is the largest commitment by one country ever to address a single disease. PEPFAR successes bolstered through our multilateral contributions to the Global Fund. The U.S. just hosted a very successful 7th replenishment of the fund in September. Again, it's easy to throw words around, but I think in this case they really apply. It's been nothing short of extraordinary. You've heard the numbers. More than 25 million lives saved, 70,000 community clinics, 3,000 laboratories built, 340,000 healthcare workers hired, entire public health systems formed with over a dozen countries which have either reached their HIV treatment goals or managed control of the virus altogether. And again, I just want to come back to what's so important, I think, as a takeaway, and it really goes to what we heard from Dee. These numbers, to so many of us, are, yes, big numbers, but they're abstractions. These are real lives. These are real stories. Stories, again, that would have ended, but instead continued and started new stories. And not just stories, contributions to our world, contributions to our communities. That's what this is all really fundamentally about. That's what's so powerful about it. There's something else that's powerful, too. The systems put in place by PEPFAR have become an integral part of the health security architecture of countries around the world. They helped us to respond to emerging outbreaks like avian flu in 2009, Ebola in 2014. And the lessons that it's taught public health experts, epidemiologists, community health workers, and others have played a central role in shaping our response to COVID-19, from efforts to track the virus's spread to the quest to swiftly fund and manufacture safe, effective vaccines and treatments, to the logistics behind getting hundreds of millions of shots into arms. Now, we are continuing to build on PEPFAR's many successes to create a stronger global health security architecture to prevent, to detect, to respond to future health emergencies. Dr. Fauci, you once said that PEPFAR shows what the goodwill of a nation can do, and you were right. PEPFAR also shows us what American diplomacy can do. Bring together governments, bring together the public and private sectors, communities, to tackle challenges that none of us can actually effectively deal with alone. And that creates and has created a healthier, safer, and ultimately more secure world. But here's the truth. Even as we celebrate the successes of PEPFAR, we cannot, we must not lose sight of the very serious work still required for us to end the global HIV health epidemic by 2030. Infection rates are again rising in many parts of the world. The UNAIDS report that was released just this week confirmed that persistent inequities continue to threaten progress for children, for young women and girls, and other at-risk populations, such as the LGBTQI+ people, people who use drugs, and sex workers. Too many countries still have fragile and insufficiently resourced public health systems, which makes it difficult to offer services beyond HIV/AIDS treatments, and that undercuts our capacity to respond to emerging threats. We now have a new 5-year PEPFAR strategy. We launched it yesterday, and the primary purpose of that strategy is to fill those gaps. Among other efforts, PEPFAR will invest in targeted programming to reduce inequities among underserved populations, like young women and girls. It will partner with more local organizations, faith-based, women, minority-led groups, which have trusted relationships with hard-to-reach communities. It will connect countries with development finance, commercial banks, so that they can build their own regional manufacturing capabilities for antiretrovirals, for diagnostic tests, for personal protective gear. Giving countries the capacity to meet their own challenges so that they're not dependent on anyone else and indeed, not only the capacity to meet their own challenges, but to help others meet theirs. That is a powerful thing to do and vitally important. In 2006, Ada Mukuka looked out at her two young daughters and wondered if she would be around to help them go to university. She'd recently been diagnosed as HIV positive in Zambia. Treatments were still difficult to access. She wasn't sure if she would survive until her daughters made it to school. Today, Ida's another one who is healthy. She has two daughters who are now young women, one on her way to grad school, the other a lawyer who's arguing cases before the High Court of Zambia. And like the story you heard from Dee, like this story, like so many others, these are precisely the kind of achievements that PEPFAR has helped to make possible by furthering research on life-saving drugs, making those treatments available to individuals like Ida, like Dee, to people around the world. Over the next 5 years, this latest PEPFAR strategy will keep making advancements like that possible so that millions more people can live healthy lives and live lives to their full potential. So, it was important for me to come by today, to see all of you, to be with all of you, to simply say this: thank you for such extraordinary work over so many years, but there's work to do. The job is not finished. We've got to see it to the finish line. We're determined to be your partners in doing that. Thank you very much.